Hello and welcome to the program. I am Suren. If I would tell you that I am a born skeptic, would you believe me? Right in the beginning, when I was only a small child, able to recall my dreams and observed things around me, I was told that there was a big, strong, and very powerful God, the Father, in the sky, and somewhere in the heavens. And He was always watching us little boys. It was then when I asked, first in my mind, then what was He, the big God, watching us little boys for? I even voiced my questions for adults around me to answer. Those adults other than my parents as well. The unanimous answer came from all those people was that we may be committing big sins. I did not know what those things which were known as sins were, let alone to understand them. And the good Lord in the heavens would take note of and write down note all about our sins in His holy book of life. That really did not make any sense. Ever since I have been watching the skies, clouds, sunrises, sunsets, storms, and lightning, I could see what was physically happening there, but I could not see a God, the supposed Father of all humanity, as I was told. There were people who told me, as my brother and other youngsters at the time, that the great God we couldn't see unless He wanted us to see Him in the clouds. This naturally increased my curiosity and interest in watching the clouds all the time, and occasionally I would see an image of an old man in the clouds, usually sidewise, usually like a silhouette. Occasionally also I would notice an eye looking at us, all from the sky, but they were fast disappearing images in the clouds, and nothing more. All I could see was the clouds and not a God. The truth of the matter is that I started to doubt if there was a God I was looking at. Why was there a God in the heavens who needed to see if we were committing sins, that He could write down all about them and later to punish us, as we have been told, and that it was the right religion that had the answers? Think about it. Really, was I discovering then more truths at school and at home? Question mark. Indeed, I was discovering something very important, and that there was no such a person called a God. And I could think about that God person, as I was told, that the reason of us being told all those stories was to keep us little children appeased and happy enough not to think, or even perhaps not even to imagine, or perhaps imagine only in a limited fashion, or to become dependent on those religious imaginings, fantasies, and beliefs. However, growing up in a family of non-believers, in any religion that is, was indeed like a blessing of the fun kind. I was happy not to go to any places of worship like my other friends did. I was happy not to be bothered about praising anybody or praying to a stone pillar carved like a human figure on the cross. I was happy not to burn candles for the dead in graveyards like those others who adhered to a religious belief system, and that is what started me to become very critical about what people who used to tell me things. I could not believe in nor accept their stories, even at that very young age. But by everything told to me, they were making me more curious about them, and so to search and discover things by myself. Of course, I have been considered as a rebellious New Ager at the time of my childhood. But my parents, who were in literal terms atheists, did not mind. Any religious presentation at school in the form of singing hymns or prayers did not appeal to me either, nor supported by my parents. And I was so very, very happy. That's a fact. My further observations as a child were that I was free to believe or not in anything to do with any belief system, and to live in a restricted way. I was free to express my own self in feelings without realizing that I was living in a country and in a world where our lives were all controlled or even restricted. Any religious belief, wherever it might have been, for all restricting and stopping us in dreaming, imagining, and living our lives freely, as naturally as it had to be. Indeed, I was a skeptic when I was a child, and that made me certainly very different. And many people around me, including my friends, even some of my relatives, could not understand me. It was so terrible that especially when people considered me as a young child whose head was over the clouds, always dreaming, always imagining childish things, hoping that he, that's me, in his childhood would grow up and learn that there was a God who controlled everything, while writing down all about our sins in his book of life. I was very happy to have parental home without such nonsense, which was not believed in, and indeed I was born forever skeptic. Where I was living at the time, where a certain religious system was followed, that was very unnatural to me, and where it was unacceptable for people like my parents who did not accept and believe in such practices. It was a lifestyle which was not followed nor acceptable other than simply enduring it, if that makes sense. Everywhere I turned to for some enlightenment, I encountered people intending to control everybody else as everything else, considering many other issues, no matter or what background they were from, and I thought that even then the religious systems were not only geared to supposedly teach how to control everybody the way their beliefs have dictated them, and possibly belonging to another belief had been attracting those constantly bullying others, dividing them into classes where one was laughed at, and all opportunities being denied. Yeah. Eventually, this local custom was becoming too overpowering even for a young person like myself. I was then, when in my mid-20s, introduced to a cultist system of people who went door to door, preaching about the ending of the world and all about the kingdom of a God. When I was ready and moved to Germany, with the kind assistance of some friends, I discovered that I truly jumped from frying pan into the fire. This is where I suffered even more bullying, discriminating, and other undesirable attitudes from those around me while studying at a university and the places I worked at. After the marriage to a native German, I was even far more subjected to discriminating attitudes, everybody indirectly trying to control me, and my every step until my permanent migration to Australia. I became even more skeptical about people's motives and all their attitudes. The subjects I have studied and the cultural habits displayed by my ex-partner, who was then excessively dedicated to the cult, wherein they assisted me to become more cautious and more careful. However, I am not complaining about this because I am now, and as ever since, very happy as I kept my forever skeptical behavior, which not at all based on cynicism, but probable facts. Indeed, these words are not said to gain anybody's sympathy, but as an example why skepticism on my part was an important step towards being free. That is, free to think and free to be. But what is skepticism? What varieties are there? Is skepticism critical thinking, or can it be classified as cynicism? Well, skepticism is a questioning attitude or doubt towards knowledge and against beliefs or dogma, demanding evidence before accepting something as true. It ranges from everyday questioning of evidence to psychological and a systematic doubt pattern that certain knowledge is attainable. But it can serve as a method for refining understanding and critically analyzing evidence. Yeah? What are the key aspects of skepticism? So, let us consider them briefly, shall we? Firstly, let us define it. It is an attitude showing doubt about whether something is true or useful. What about the origins of skepticism? It is derived from the Greek word skeptikos, questioning or doubting. And the types of skepticism? Common, everyday skepticism. Questioning specific evidence or criticism in daily life. Politics, science, etc. Philosophical skepticism. A broader position that doubts the possibility of attaining true knowledge in certain areas. Here we will need to consider also the historical content. Initiated by ancient Greek thinkers like Arcesilaus and Carneades, who in the 3rd century BCE challenged the dogmatism of other scholars and their schemes by arguing that nothing could be known with absolute certainty. There are a number of historic figures, but let us remain with the key figures in skepticism. For instance, René Descartes, who utilized a form of skepticism to build a formulation and foundation for knowledge, and earlier skeptics who practiced suspension of judgment. Role of skepticism in society. Essential to science, philosophy, and journalism for evaluating claims, although it is sometimes confused with cynicism. Skepticism differs from cynicism, which is a general suspicion of people's motives, and pseudo-skepticism, which is dogmatic denial disguised as scientific criticism and skepticism. Keep that in mind. Philosophical skepticism, or questioning the knowledge which differs from other forms of skepticism, even rejecting common sense. Now, philosophical skepticism is often classified into two general categories: those denying all possibility of knowledge, and those admiring for the suspension of judgmental one. And we may even consider it as two inadequacies of evidence. This difference is modeled after the differences observed between academic skeptics and Pyrrhonian skeptics in ancient Greek philosophy. Suspending the judgment and skepticism in a sense as the way of life, helping the practitioner to achieve inner peace. Some theorists criticize philosophical skepticism based on the claim that it is a self-refuting idea, as its proponents seem to claim to know that there is no knowledge. Other objections focus on its knowledge-based events, its unusualness and distance from regular life. In fact, philosophical skepticism, in general, is a questioning attitude toward all kinds of knowledge claims. In this sense, as we discover, it becomes common in everyday existence. In fact, many are ordinarily skeptics about parapsychology or about astrology because they doubt the claims made by prominent proponents of these fields. But, interestingly, some people are not skeptical about other knowledge claims like the ones found in regular school books. On the other hand, philosophical skepticism differs from ordinary skepticism, in which it even rejects knowledge claims that belongs to basic common sense and seems to be very certain. For this reason, it is sometimes referred to as radical doubt. In some cases, it is also claimed, and we can read, that one does not know that I have two hens, and that the sun will come out tomorrow. Philosophical skepticism is not in any position commonly adopted by regular people in everyday life. The denial of knowledge is usually associated with the demand that one should suspend one's beliefs about the doubted proposition. This means that one should neither believe nor disbelieve it, but keep an open mind without committing oneself in one way or the other. You see my point? Philosophical skepticism is often based on the idea that no matter how certain one is about a given belief, one could still be wrong about it. From this observation, it is argued that what you believe does not amount to knowledge. Philosophical skepticism follows from the consideration that this might be the case for most of all beliefs. Because of its wide-ranging consequences, it is of central interest to theories of knowledge, since it questions their very foundations. According to some other definitions, philosophical skepticism is not just the rejection of some forms of commonly accepted knowledge, but the rejection of all forms of knowledge. Think about it. We may have relatively secure beliefs in some cases, but those beliefs also never amount to knowledge. There are forms of philosophical skepticism which restricts this rejection to specific fields, like the external world or moral doctrine. In some cases, knowledge per se is not rejected, but still denied that one can conceal to be absolutely certain. There are few defenders of philosophical skepticism in a strong sense. It is much more commonly used as a theoretical tool to test theories. It is a philosophical methodology that can be used to prove and probe a theory to find its weak points, either to expose it or modify it in order to arrive at a better version of it. Some theorists distinguish philosophical skepticism from methodological skepticism in that question the possibility of certainty and knowledge, whereas methodical skepticism is in epistemological position in which one questions the veracity of claims lacking empirical evidence. In practice, the terms most commonly used to reference the examination of claims and theories that appear to be pseudoscience, rather than the routine discussions and challenges among scientists. In the ancient philosophy, skepticism was seen not just as a theory about the existence of knowledge, but a way of life. The outlook is motivated by the idea that suspending one's judgment on all kinds of issues brings with it inner peace, and thereby contributes to the skeptic's happiness. Skepticism can be classified according to its scope. Local skepticism includes being skeptical about particular areas of knowledge. For instance, moral skepticism. Skepticism about the external world, or skepticism about other minds, whereas radical skepticism claims that one cannot know about knowing anything. Think about it. Skepticism can also be classified according to its method. Western philosophy has two basic approaches to skepticism. Let's look at them. Artesian skepticism, which is named after René Descartes, who was not a skeptic but used some traditional skeptical arguments in his meditations to help establish his rationalistic approach to knowledge, which attempts to show that any proposed knowledge can be doubted. Agrippian skepticism focuses on justification rather than the attempt to justify a claim as adequate. One can justify a claim based on other claims, and this leads to an infinite regression of justification. One can use a dogmatic assertion, but it is not a justification. One can use circular reasoning, but this fails to justify the conclusion. Let us then consider logical thinking for a brief moment or two. Logical describes something reasonable, valid, or based on sound judgment and orderly reasoning, often relating to deductions or facts. Consider also some of its key examples. One of them is decisions. Moving to a smaller house was the logical thing to do, for example. Deduction. Here is an example. Rain was a logical expectation given the time of the year. Right? What about argumentation? Okay, he made some logical arguments at the debate, for instance. Computing. A computer is programmed using logical languages. What about common synonyms of this? Rational and reasonable. Sensible, sound, valid. Ordered, coherent, consistent, structured. Analytical, well, detective, influential. The term is rooted in the Greek word logos, meaning reason or idea, and it indicates a process free from rational emotional influence. Definition of logical according to encyclopedia or various encyclopedias. Logic is the study of correct reasoning. It includes both formal and informal logic. Formal logic is the study of detective, valid, influences, or logical truth. It examines how conclusions follow from premises based on the structure of arguments alone, independent of their topic and content. Informal logic is associated with informal fallacies, critical thinking, and argumentation theory. Informal logic examines arguments expressed in a natural language, whereas formal logic uses formal language. When used as a countable noun, the term the logic refers to a specific logical formal system that articulates a proof system. Logic plays a central role in many fields, such as philosophy, mathematics, computer sciences, and linguistics. Logic studies arguments, which consist of a set of premises that leads to a conclusion. An example is the argument from the premises, okay, it's Sunday, and if it is Sunday, then I don't have to work, leading to the conclusion, I don't have to work. Premises and conclusions express propositions or claims that can be true or false. An important feature of propositions is their internal structure. Complex propositions are made of simple propositions linked by logical vocabulary like and, or, if done, and so forth. Simple propositions also have parts like Sunday or work in the example. The truth of any proposition usually depends on the meanings of all of its parts. However, this is not the case for logically true propositions. They are true only because of the logical structure, independent of the specific meanings of the individual parts. Logic has been studied since antiquity. Early approaches include Aristotelian logic, Stoic logic, Nyaya, monism. Aristotelian logic focuses on reasoning in the form of syllogisms. It was once considered the main system of logic in the Western world until it was replaced by modern formal logic, which has its roots in the works of late 19th century mathematicians such as Gottlob Frege. Today, the most commonly used system is classical logic. It consists of propositional logic and first-order logic. Propositional logic only considers logical relations between full propositions. First-order logic also takes the internal parts of propositions into account, like the one that predicates and quantifies. Extended logic accepts the basic intuition behind classical logic and other fields, such as physics, ethics, and epistemology. Deviant logic, on the other hand, rejects certain classical intuition and provides alternative explanations of the basic laws of logic. What about premises and conclusions? They are the basic parts of inferences or arguments and therefore play a central role in logic. The case of a valid inference or a correct argument, the conclusion follows from the premises. In other words, the premises support the conclusion. For example, the premises Mars is red and Mars is a planet support the conclusion, as it is written, Mars is a red planet. For most types of logic, it is accepted that premises and conclusions have to be truth-bearers. This means that they have a truth value. They are either true or false. Contemporary philosophy generally reasons either as propositions or sentences. Propositions are the denotations of sentences and are usually seen as abstract objects. For example, the English sentence, "The tree is green," is different from the German sentence, "Der Baum ist grün," but both express the same proposition. Now, skepticism and logic. W.V.O. Quinn argued that statement, even logical or mathematical, is immune to revision. Accordingly, logic and mathematics and the laws of nature are taken to be central and perhaps dispensable to our web of belief or the total conceptual scheme. We need the world but not necessarily immune to change in light of recalcitrant experience. His views sparked many discussions about conventionalism in logic and whether logic is empirical. Anti-exceptionalism about logic have become very popular indeed recently. This view considers the logic being not spatial. There are two different perspectives from philosophy of science worth considering. First, discussions of what is called the relative a priori, which are the non-empirical elements of science that are relative to certain practices or conceptual schemes, but that do not depend on empirical evidence or directly tested by empirical evidence. Mathematical elements of science that are theories which have often been discussed in these contexts and can be discussed as conventional and so revisable, or as constitutive but replaceable, as has been the case in the history of science. It has also been noted that the understanding of how logic and mathematics work and how we prove things is based on our understanding of physics. For example, a proof is a set of computations we can undertake to verify that something is true or false. Computation is a process of the physical kind, controlled by the laws of physics. Alas, our understanding of physics is fallible. Our understanding of mathematics and logic is also necessarily fallible. So that's where we are at. Logic, knowing the difference between this and the other. I shall leave this with you for today's session. Until we meet you again by the next episode. In the meantime, keep smiling and be happy always. Thank you.